Let me say, first of all, that I'm no longer with Raven Bricks, so I can actually speak. For the first time in years, I can just say what's on my mind and not, be somehow misrepresenting what the board of directors would wish me to say. So let me also, I'm going to start by passing around some samples. The lighting in here is not ideal, so you'll have to take my word for it that these things look awesome. But I'm going to pass around two different kinds of smart window. What I invented here is a film. It goes on the inside surface of the outside pane of glass in a double paned window, and it tints when it gets hot. The version that's actually being released gets dark when it gets hot. The version that is not being released, but I think looks a lot cooler, turns into a mirror when it gets hot. So I will pass those around. This is just my favorite product demo ever because everyone knows what a hairdryer is. Everyone knows how hot it is. And so if I hold this up and I then do this, nobody has to guess what's happening. Can I get a round of applause? This is 10 years of my life. All right, that's the tinted one. I'm going to do the reflective one now. And from where you're standing, it probably looks reflective. I mean, this is a half mirror right now. So it's, if you're standing on the dim side, looking at the bright side, it looks transparent. If you're the other way around, then it looks like a mirror. But when I hit it with the hairdryer, it's going to turn from a half mirror to a full mirror. All right, I'll pass this one around this way. All right, so how did this come about? The story is very long, very circuitous, and full of failures disguised as other things. So the backstory, as Tom mentioned, I was originally an aerospace engineer, and then I became a science fiction writer. And as a result of being a science fiction writer, I ended up working for Wired because, at least at that time, they were really into hiring science fiction writers. They felt that for the kind of stories that they wanted to tell, science fiction writers were the best reporters to both dig out the story and also tell it. And as a result, well, going all the way back to about 1997, I became very interested in something called quantum dots. This is basically a very small bit of semiconductor that traps electrons in a very particular way. And the thing that's interesting is that the electrons that are trapped inside of a quantum dot will arrange themselves very much in the same way that they would inside an atom. So quantum dots are sometimes called artificial atoms because they have some of the same properties as an atom. I became really interested in the idea of tunable quantum dots. If you could stick little tiny wires around them and sort of control the number of electrons that were trapped and the configuration of the electrons that were trapped, then you could have programmable atoms that could be anything that you wanted. And I loved this idea, and I put it into a science fiction book. The reason I did that is because the book was called The Collapsium, and it was intended to be kind of a science fiction fairy tale. And for a fairy tale, you have to have something that stands in for magic. So I needed this kind of programmable matter concept as the magical device for this science fiction story. Now, as soon as the book came out, I started to get angry letters from readers saying, hey, I thought you were a hard science fiction writer. I thought your stories had a scientific basis. What's this programmable matter crap that you just made up that has nothing to do with anything? And so I started writing letters back to people saying, well, no, I didn't make it up. And then I thought, well, why send one letter to one person? I'll just write an article, and then I can point people to the article. And so I wrote an article for Analog. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that magazine. But I had to really trim it down. They run very, very short articles in Analog. And so I had kind of more information than would fit in the Analog article. So I pitched an article to Wired, and they said, yeah, great, that's fine, we'll do that. And they had a big budget for it, bigger. I mean, I thought I had the article already kind of done, but they said, no, here's 10 grand, travel around, talk to college professors, whatever. Okay, great. So I did that. And then I wrote this article for Wired magazine. And this was back in the Kevin Kelly days when they had really long, sprawling sort of articles. Then in the course of writing that article and doing all the research, I did way more research than I needed, even for a long Wired article. So I had enough material left over to write a book. And so I did. And that was the book that Tom mentioned, which was called Hacking Matter. And it was really, quantum dots were the kind of the enabling technology that was described in that book. But the book fundamentally was about how programmable matter affects daily life in every way. And you know, the book kind of struck a nerve. It was a national bestseller. It was for a short time the #4 bestseller on Amazon.com, which I was pretty happy with that. But anyway, the strangest consequence of that book came because one of the co-inventors of the BlackBerry called me up one day, and he said, you know, here's who I am, and I read your book, and I thought it was very interesting. I was like, okay, cool. And he said, you're also an engineer, right? I said, uh-huh. And he said, how much of this stuff do you think is really possible? And I said, probably about half of it, but I don't know which half. He said, okay, that's about what I thought. I'd like to give you $1 million just to see what happens. There isn't really I don't think most of us don't really have a response for a statement like that.
Yes.
Anyway, I had already started a company. It was called the Programmable Matter Corporation, and I was putting together proposals for the government, try to get the government to fund this wacky idea. But he just said, send the proposal to me. I'll have some people look at it. And he was involved with a thing called the Perimeter Institute in Waterloo, Ontario, which heavy-duty quantum mechanics research institute. So he was able to run it past a few people and say, is this guy nuts? And they said, no, he's not nuts. This sounds pretty cool. So we got the money and started working in earnest on these programmable quantum dot devices. Now, the problem that immediately came up is that the size of features that we needed to make these, I'm going to move this so I don't trip on it. The feature sizes that we needed were right at the ragged edge of what was possible with the technology of the time. And so we faced that problem right away. And so everything that we were doing was kind of specialty, one-off, you know, very difficult to get fabricated. And then once it's fabricated, it's this teeny little thing in the center of this vast, you know, wafer. Or we'd get custom wafers made, and then we'd have the wafers diced into chips, and then we'd dice the chips into little sub-chips, and we'd metallize them, and we'd have them patterned. And just even attaching the wires to something like that is really challenging. And finding the device that you've built in all this vastness is quite challenging. So we'd have arrows pointing in, you know, successively smaller markers to point the way.
So, just a quick question.
Uh-huh.
So at that point, what were you hoping to see, or did you not know?
Well, we really didn't know. I mean, we had a vague goal in mind, which was to create multifunctional sensor materials for aerospace applications, hyperspectral imaging sensors. That was our vague idea, but mostly we were just fucking around because we could. But anyway, we started to run into a problem. These devices were too small. We were, by trying to make single devices, we were driving ourselves nuts. So we had to find ways to massively parallel make millions of these devices on a chip, so that we could see effects that were large enough to really influence the output of a spectrometer and things like that. And right away we started to notice that something was wrong. These chips were behaving in ways that were very unnatural. They were not doing what a normal chip made of those materials would do, but we couldn't get them to do the same thing twice. And the reason turned out to be that they were very, very temperature sensitive. And every time we tried to apply a voltage to these little tiny wires, we were actually applying that voltage to big pads on the surface of the chip that were feeding down into these smaller wires. And so we were putting a fair amount of energy into the chip, and we were heating it up. And it was that temperature change more than anything else that we were doing that was dominating. It was swamping out any other effects that we might observe. And so then we took the wires out altogether, and we just started playing with the temperature of the chip. And we found, yeah, we could move the spectral lines quite far. We could make very substantial effects just by changing temperature. And so we thought, okay, well, what we have really are thermochromic devices. They're not programmable in the sense that we had originally envisioned, but they do respond to their environment in this more sort of organic way. And so then we started thinking, well, what use do we have for thermochromic devices? And again, we were kind of narrowly focused on aerospace sensors, and that was the wrong market. And so when the $1 million was spent up, we went to go raise money, and immediately we were getting feedback from people. This is the wrong market. You guys have a lot of cool ideas, but you're in the wrong market. What else you got? And well, okay, opening up hacking matter. How about the smart house? How about smart building materials? And so the original idea was not for a smart window, it was for a smart wall that would, you know, when it was warm out, it would take all the energy that was coming in and sort of convert it and reflect it back out. And when it was cold outside, it would take that same energy and divert it inside. So it was kind of this switchable thing. There would be a large effect based on even sometimes very small changes in temperature. Clever device. But the problem with that one was that it was very expensive to make. I mean, we never did reduce it to practice because it would have been very expensive and also, unfortunately, very toxic. Because to get the best effects that we needed, we had to use materials like cadmium telluride. Not a lot, but you know, people start saying, well, how are you going to dispose of this? Right? It's a building material. What happens when they take down the building? You're going to throw cadmium telluride in the landfill? I don't think so. Okay. And so we were sitting around one day trying to work out the economics of this clever yet not very well meshed with the real world device. And all of a sudden I just said, wait a minute, we can use a liquid crystal to achieve the same effect. And my two partners just went on talking whatever they were talking about at the time, I don't know. And they were ignoring me. And I had to say it 2 or 3 times before they sat up and listened. And they were like, what? And I drew it up on the whiteboard. And they're like, oh, shit. And then we knew we really had something because liquid crystal is something that's very familiar to everybody. It's not scary. It does get thrown into landfills all the time. And you know, it's not so exotic. When you're trying to make a huge technological leap, trying to get people to give you money for this huge technological leap, that's a big hurdle. If you say, oh yeah, we found a new use for liquid crystals in smart windows, oh, that's a no-brainer. So from that point, we were able to hire a CEO and raise money very quickly. And here's where the story gets sort of sad and real-worldy, because we produced the first prototypes of this smart wall, and they worked. And then people even made an even better suggestion at the time, which is, why don't you get rid of the smart wall and just make a smart window? If you strip away the opaque elements of this smart wall, you've got a kick-ass smart window because it doesn't have any wires. And that was true, and so we did that. And also, the smart window was a lot easier to explain. When we tried to explain the concept of a smart wall to people, it got very confusing very fast, because they just, you know, they wanted to compare it to insulation, and it was doing something completely different. But the smart window, even though the smart window is doing essentially the same thing, it was a lot easier for people to comprehend, and so we went with that. Now, this is a product that everyone needs. Literally everyone needs this. Every time I talk to just ordinary people in the street, it's a smart window film that tints when it gets hot. Everybody says, I need that. I have this one room, I have this, yeah, everybody needs it. And the question that I hear from people always is not, how much does it cost? What's the ROI? How recyclable is it? I never hear questions like that from ordinary people. The question that I always hear from ordinary people is, where can I get it? When can I get it? I need it now. So this is a product that everyone needs, and everyone agrees that everyone needs it. I don't have to explain it to them. They want it right now. So even a product that's this obviously good and this obviously useful, from the time that we were able to show prototypes to people and show that they worked and show computer models saying exactly what the economic benefits were, it was still 7 fucking years. And you know, that says something awful about the real world. It really does. Part of that, I think, was just due to poor decisions on our part. I mean, it's when you're doing something for the very first time. We weren't experts in the window industry. We weren't experts in the liquid crystal industry. So we were, call it outsider art. I think when talented people come fresh to a new industry, they tend to be very creative, and that's where a lot of good ideas come from. Yeah?
Was there some, my personal experience is that there's some political, in other words, you're making somebody else look stupid.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And so there's going to be resistance in the channel and everything else. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. How can I say this kindly? The government labs tried to kill us. The government labs had poured literally hundreds of millions of dollars into electrochromic windows. And electrochromic windows were going nowhere because they were too expensive. Nobody was buying them. Nobody wanted them because people would say, well, that's cool. That's nice. How much does it cost? Whoa. Yeah, no, not buying that. And so electrochromic windows were nothing but a curiosity. We came along with something that did exactly the same thing, had exactly the same energy benefits, cost 1/10 as much. And in fact, you know, that switch, if you give people a switch to operate it, people would sometimes complain, you know, VCs would say, oh, you don't have a switch. People want a switch. They like that switch. Fuck you. That switch is the worst thing you could have, because if you give people the ability to operate the device, the energy savings go right out the window, because human beings are the worst control system ever invented. And the best example that I can come up with is blinds. If you give people control over a window blind, what they're going to do is they're going to wait until the sun is in their face and it's bothering them. The light and the heat of the sun is bothering them. They're going to drop that blind. And what are they going to do? They're going to leave the blinds down for months until one day they say, you know what, it's too dark in here. I'm going to raise the blind again. And so the blind is doing nothing like an optimal function as a shading device. And so automated shading devices, you know, you see a lot of automated shades being installed in buildings these days that don't have switches for exactly that reason. Because if you allow people to operate the shades, they will screw up the energy savings on which the installation is based. There's no ROI. It never pays for itself if you let humans operate it. We had a lot of there were a lot of VCs didn't like the idea because they wanted to switch. VCs mostly, you know, they're Silicon Valley types. Even the ones that don't live in Silicon Valley, they have that same kind of idea. They like software, they like hardware. They want something to be operable. The idea that it's automatic, that it reacts to its environment in this sort of organic way, they didn't really like that. The government labs didn't like the fact that we were making them look stupid. And basically, the way that they wanted to work with us is, okay, let's just kind of bring your technology in-house. You give us your money, you give us millions of dollars, and we'll study it for years, and then we'll tell people whether it's good or not. And we didn't like that idea. And meanwhile, while we were doing this, these same exact government labs were patenting electrochromic technologies and giving those companies millions of dollars. They wouldn't give us millions of dollars. They would give millions of dollars to companies that would compete with us while making these sort of vague and empty promises to us. So I don't want to say that we didn't get any good out of the government labs. I think we did get some benefit by working with them. But we also, while they were giving us these benefits, they were also trying to murder us behind the scenes. And I guess I'm on video when I say that, so I should I should be careful. This isn't going on the internet or anything, right? Anyway, I'm not speaking on behalf of Raven Brick. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. This is my personal opinion. So yeah, there were entrenched interests. There are always, when you have a truly disruptive technology, there are always entrenched interests that want to see it not happen. They want to either ignore it and hope that it goes away, or make these sort of subtle, deniable actions to discourage it while looking like they're not doing anything like that. So those were definite problems. Another really big problem that we had was the economy melting down in 2008. We were very close to selling this technology to 3M. We were on what they called a 90-day acquisition track. That doesn't necessarily mean that you get acquired at the end of 90 days, but it meant that the due diligence was going to be complete at the end of 90 days, and we were going to get a thumbs up or thumbs down. That 90-day acquisition track was a highly coveted thing, and it took us quite a while to get there. We were about 40 days into that 90-day track when the stock market crashed. And to their credit, 3M was one of the first companies, I think, to see the implications of that. There was a lot of wishful thinking going on in the business world at that time, but 3M shut everything down. They got very, very tight-fisted very, very quickly. So all the years of work that we put into that 3M project went away. And so we thought, okay, well, we need to find a replacement for 3M. We need to find another company that makes just as much sense, that'll do the same thing. But the economy was rapidly tanking, and so everybody was just kind of, no, we don't want to talk to you. We spent about a year just spinning our wheels, not accomplishing anything. Then we eventually did find Dow Chemical, and Dow Chemical was filling the same role as 3M, and we got further along with them. And we had actually passed all the technical due diligence, all the economic due diligence. It was green lights all the way down the board, and they were ready to go. And I'm not. A lot of things, a lot of deals. You get these airy promises. People say, "Oh yeah, it nearly happened." This really, really nearly happened. We had documents that said, you've passed all your due diligence and we're ready to move forward. But then they got into a deal with Saudi Aramco to build the largest refinery and chemical products production facility in Saudi Arabia. It sucked up $40 billion of spare cash, and this happened very suddenly. And so every project that was not related to the Saudi Aramco deal, every new project that wasn't related to that got shut down. This happened very suddenly, and the people that we were talking to had no idea. This came down from the highest levels at Dow Chemical. So that set us back. And then we dealt with still another company called Quanex, which is a building materials company. And that one, we didn't get quite as close. But we'd spent years trying to sell the technology, trying to find a buyer for the technology. And if that had worked, it would have been great. If we had actually succeeded in finding a buyer, it would have been great. If the economy hadn't melted down, that's probably exactly what would have happened. But instead, we always said from the very beginning, well, if we can't find a buyer for the technology, we'll just build a factory. We said that, never imagining that it would actually happen. But that's exactly what did happen. We got forced into this track of building a factory. And so now we're not talking about raising a few $1 million to do the R&D, produce the prototypes, there's a lot of testing involved also, because if you want to be in a window, there are some very, very brutal tests that you have to be able to pass to demonstrate that you can survive in that environment, that it's efficacious, that it's not going to burst into flames, that it's going to last 30 years. But, with all that stuff behind us, that only takes, I think we were like $8 million in when we had everything all proven out. But building a factory takes another 10 million on top of that. And not just building it, I mean, the actual tin bending for the factory was under 5 million. But you have to you've got to buy all the materials to operate the factory. It's a very, very large logistical operation. And when you raise that much money, you lose control of things very quickly. You have investors with a lot of money, and they bring in what they call professional management. And professional management looks at the sort of people who start companies. You know, you're not from Harvard, you don't have an MBA, you don't really have much of anything. What are your credentials? Well, I did this. As soon as we started building the factory, I sort of sensed the winds shifting. When it comes to selling the technology, I was very clearly the guy. When it comes to building and operating a factory, I was kind of redundant to the process. And so at the end of 2013, they shut down the R&D department and gave me a very nice speech and ushered me into what they call an advisory role, which is another sort of polite turn of phrase. And so the state of it right now is that the product is in very limited manual production. There's an automated factory that's under construction as we speak, and should be operational. I mean, it's scheduled to be operational in June, which, you know, we're all residents of the real world here. Call it September-ish. But that factory is capable of producing 100,000 square feet per shift, per month. And that's, compared to the window industry, that's a tiny amount. But that's the spec'd quantity that it's supposed to be able to produce. Now, there are very strong indications that when you're doing anything with polymer films, it's all about web speed. The web is the roll of plastic film that kind of winds its way through machinery. And the original spec speed was 3 feet per minute web speed, but there are indications that it can go as high as 12 feet per minute, maybe even higher than that. So when you start talking about turning up the dial, turning up the speed of the machine, and then there's also no reason why you can run the machine for only one shift. You can run it for 2 shifts pretty easily. If you talk about running it for 3 shifts, it's actually easier to build a second machine. So once this gets rolling, the amount of material that's going to be produced by this facility is pretty large, pretty small by the standards of the window industry, but pretty large by the standards of anybody else. It's quite a lot of material, and it should be widely available and finding its way into all kinds of projects. Now, one of the challenges that we had to, in addition to building the factory, we also had to build the sales channels. Since we weren't going through a company like 3M that had its own sales channels, we had to build our own. And, you know, that's, for building materials, you work with these people called architectural sales reps. And they're these regional people that they represent a small stable of products that they push to architects and builders. And so we have, I think, 10 different architectural sales reps that we're working with. And in some cases, they're individuals, but in most cases, they're small companies that have, you know, 10, 12 people of their own. And so they're all ready to go. I mean, the factory's in place, the sales channels are in place, the demand, God knows the demand is in place. One of the, you know, when we were raising money for the factory, we ran into this kind of catch-22 that people called raven brick fatigue. They said, you guys have been around a long time and you haven't really done anything, so why should we be impressed? Well, the reason we haven't done anything is because we didn't build a factory, right? We should have, if we'd known, we would have built a factory years ago. We would have saved ourselves a lot of time, a lot of trouble, a lot of money, a lot of fatigue. So, I mean, it took a lot to get to where we are right now. And the irony, I feel kind of like Moses, who can lead the tribe to the promised land, but isn't allowed to dwell there himself. So, and you know, people keep telling me I'm in good company. Tech company founders get fired all the time for the exact sort of reasons that I'm describing here. Professional management just doesn't like inventors and founders. We're sloppy, messy, creative people, and they don't want creativity in the operation of a factory. And it scares me a little bit because they actually told me on my way out, they said, we don't need any more innovation. And I was like, oh, you know, I'm a shareholder in this company. I think I don't like that that turn of phrase. I don't like the thought process behind it. So a lot of poor decisions, a lot of bad luck, and yet I never doubted for a minute. I went a year without getting paid. We were operating out of the probably one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in Denver, and we had to go armed because, you know, we were in daily fear of getting murdered. But I put up with all of that because I knew this was a product that everybody needed. It was an idea that was too good to fail, and if it failed, it was on us and not any other thing. And so I just made sure to work absolutely as hard as needed to get us through those.
So Will, can you talk a little bit about the money you raised and how you raised it, and who you talked to about raising money?
Well, I talked about the first $1 million. I don't recommend that as a strategy. It's you know, it's tough to line that one up, I think. And I ended up raising another $250,000 from the same investor. After that, most tech startups go through what's called a friends and family phase, where you're tapping not large amounts from big investors, but smaller amounts from smaller investors that you have some personal connection with. And I did a little bit of that. Some connections that I actually share with Tom, but mostly the CEO that we hired was raising money from his friends and family. And that would add up to being the second $1 million. The third $1 million gets a little more, I mean, you have to be more established and you have to go to sort of more established channels. There's no real venture capital here in Colorado, and that's probably a good thing. I mean, our experiences with venture capital were not favorable. And actually, in retrospect, I can sort of understand why, because we're a hardware play, and from the standpoint of a VC, you don't have a lot of leverage in a hardware play. If you start some cool app, you know, if you write Flappy Bird and you make and you get 1 billion people to play it, your leverage there is colossal. Whereas if you have to raise $15 million to build a factory, even if you make $1 billion, your percentage return isn't nearly as high. So that's one of the things that the VCs didn't like. But also, it's a very clubby atmosphere. Their opinion of Denver is about like our opinion of, say, I don't know, Toledo, sure. So they don't think of Denver as being a technology center, and so that counted against us. And just their sort of electronic bias, I think, counted against us. Also, their proximity to Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory meant that even a very slight negative comment coming out of LBNL in the VC community would make things very, very difficult for us there. So Denver, Colorado doesn't have really much VC presence at all. But what we do have is a lot of angel investors. There are a lot of people here in this state who are high net worth individuals who like to invest. They want to give something back. They want to make the world a better place. And so they spend a lot of their time looking for good places to put their money. And good places to put their money are rare. I mean, these guys aren't dumb. They get a lot of what they call deal flow. A lot of different ideas float past them. And most of the time they're like, but we've done really, really well with, I should stop saying we, because it's not we anymore. But we did really well with angel investors for the same reason that ordinary homeowners or just ordinary people in the street get the idea right away. Angel investors, same thing. We told them what we had, and they're like, Cool. When can I get some? Oh, can I invest? So we didn't really have to even, I don't want to say we didn't have to sell it, because we did, but it was an easy sell, I think, to the sort of angel investors that operate in places like Denver and Boulder. They're very, very sympathetic to what we're trying to achieve, and then if you show them favorable economics on top of that, then it becomes kind of a no-brainer.
So they did the $10 million for the factory?
Yes. But again, we're talking about, even when you're talking about high net worth individuals, angel investors don't tend to invest in $10 million increments. $1 million is a lot for an angel investor. We have some investors that are in for like $1.5 million. We might even have one that's in for $2 million. But he's really not an individual. He's really the head of a fund. So we're talking about stuff that's well distributed. So you have to, and I guess the good thing that's when you're dealing with high net worth individuals, they know other high net worth individuals, and they can pull people in on the deal. And as the money that you need gets bigger, the people that you're dealing with get bigger. So, I mean, I can't really summarize the process in 5 minutes that took, 10 years to unfold, but that's basically how it works. That's the gist of it. Yes?
Can you comment on any of the special needs or difficulties that you had in using electrons without protons?
Well, the protons are kind of inside the semiconductor. The way quantum dots work, that's a very technical question, and so for those of you who don't care, bear with me, because I want to answer this. The way quantum dots are structured, you have the materials arranged such that the electrons fall out of one region and into another region. And so the net charge on the device is 0, but the electrons are not evenly distributed. They're highly concentrated in certain areas, and that's where they form these special structures. So they're not electrons without protons. They're mobile electrons that are distant from their protons, kind of in the same way that you see with a metal, but more precise. Does that make sense?
Yes. It's analogous to what happens in the mitochondria.
I'm sorry? You lost me there. Okay, fair enough. Behind you?
I assume you patented this. What year did you patent?
I filed the first patent in 2000, I think. And this is just another thing that I've had to get good at along the way. When I started, I didn't know anything about patenting, so my first patent was kind of a disaster. It took forever, and it wasn't a very good patent, but I learned a lot in the process. I have, at this point, 18 issued US patents that I wrote and argued myself. There are another 10 or so in the pipeline, and I have one of my favorite patents has been granted in 3 countries, but not in the US. I'm just thinking, please, please, please let this one go through. I'm pretty eclectic technologically, so I'm happy to work with quantum dots. I'm happy to work with liquid crystals. I'm happy to work with metamaterials. Anything that I can pull together. If there's a particular effect that I'm trying to achieve, I don't really care where it comes from. So that's exactly the kind of thing that really pisses off professional management. But anyway, yes, lots of patents, and kind of a core competency in building. It's not enough to have a patent on an idea. I see a lot of single patent companies or badly written patents that aren't very strong. What you have to do is not just patent an idea, you have to patent all the ideas around it. And then you have to, it's a lot like the game of curling. It's not enough to have a scoring stone, you have to have a bunch of otherwise useless stones that block the scoring stone. So if you do it right, you create this IP package that's so formidable that any company with resources is going to say, you know what, we can't compete with that. It's easier to just buy them. And that's usually the overlooked art of patent writing has that as its goal.
You have to plan for dilution as well, because again, if you had patented right at the beginning and you're 14 years into the project, you have one patent, you got 6 years left. Well,
I'm sorry?
repeat the question.
The question is dilution. If we're the first patent is a lot closer to expiring now than it was at the time that it was filed, and that's true. Fortunately, all of the quantum dot stuff has basically been abandoned for any commercial purposes. So it's all liquid crystals and to a certain extent metamaterials now. But yeah, the only advantage really is that you get the protection on a patent starts really when it issues and not when you file it. So in some cases what you want is for the patent to be examined for as long a period as it possibly can be. You can also roll the patents. You can file a patent on your idea to get the earliest possible priority date, but then you can keep filing patents that are variations on that idea to keep kind of freshness date that's current. So there's a whole art there. Again, I'm probably getting too much into the details, and most of you here probably don't care about that, but that's what we do. Yes?
I got a question for you. I've been trying to follow the technology path where you're at, and looking at pivot points. Started out looking at quantum dots. I don't know if I've got them all written down here. You started out just writing about quantum dots, individual quantum dots, then you tried to make an array of quantum dots or some kind of collection out of the wafer. And then you discovered the thermal properties. Then you started trying to make a thermal wall.
Right.
And then you came upon the thermal window. Then you said, hey, we can do this with liquid crystals. Have I captured all the pivot points?
Yes, but you had the last two reversed. The liquid crystal came first, and then the smart window after that.
My question is, looking back on that, can you imagine a way through that? I know you were learning as you went along, but imagine a way through that that might have moved you faster?
Oh yeah, the question is, in the numerous, about 7 pivot points that we encountered along the way in this project, can I imagine a path that would have taken us through there a lot faster? And the answer is yes. I think that's always true. Any engineering project would be done with great ease the second time around, but we never do them twice because the second time it's already been invented.
I didn't mean that exactly, but could you have explored more broadly on some of those points instead of saying this is what we want to do, say here's some alternatives, and maybe found a way back?
The question is, could we have broadened our alternatives rather than narrowing down at certain of those pivot points in order to move faster? And the answer is yes and no. That works when you're trying to solve a particular problem. Then it helps to, I call it flowing like water. When water encounters an obstacle, it spreads out. When it encounters a crack, it flows through. So when you're stuck on a problem, broadening your solutions helps quite a bit. When you have a solution that works, though, then what works in the business world, what the business world wants to see is that you're focusing all of your energy on the thing that's known to work. In fact, one of the problems that we had was trying to do too many things, even with this very sort of limited output. We had the smart window, we had the smart wall, we have a number of other technologies in the pipeline, and even when we decided that we needed to build a factory, we were still out there kind of pathetically trying to sell some of the technologies in the pipeline and wasting a lot of energy, a lot of time. And these weren't stupid moves because we had companies coming to us and saying, what do you have here, what do you have there? But nevertheless, it dilutes your energies. So my advice to any would-be entrepreneurs out there is to take, of the vast set of things that you could do, figure out the subset of those things that you're capable of doing well and getting funded, and then pick the very, very best of those. And by best, I don't mean your favorite. I mean the one that will be the world's favorite, the one where the combination of cool factor and economics and ease of use, where all those things kind of line up. And then just do that as well as you possibly can. Anything else, I think, is a recipe for failure.
So if you had done that, would you have gotten through this maze faster?
I think the only way to get through the maze faster would be to have a crystal ball. When I look back at the decisions that got made, for the most part, they were the best decisions that we could make with the available information at the time. And if we'd had better information, we'd have made different decisions. But that's another mistake that I think a lot of entrepreneurs make. Well, a lot of business. Technical people tend to want to wait until they have perfect information to act. Business people are accustomed to acting on incomplete information. In a tech startup, you have tech people that are forced by circumstances and by the business people around them to act based on incomplete information. And some people go crazy, literally go crazy. A friend of mine suffered a nervous breakdown as a result of this process, and I don't think he'll ever be right in the head again. Yeah, I mean, you have to if you want to do stuff, you have to do stuff. You can't wait for everything to fall in your lap, because it's not going to.
Does he have limited resources?
Limited isn't even the right word. You know, when you're operating out of the cheapest building in Denver, in the worst neighborhood in Denver, there's nothing left to cut, and you're not getting paid. You know, you're paying the engineers because they'd leave if they weren't getting paid, but the founders aren't getting paid. You can't go any leaner than that. There's no, you know, that's not even a shoestring budget. We can't afford a shoestring. What else you got? So, operating in an environment of limited to zero resources and imperfect information. If you don't have the stomach for that, then you should not be an entrepreneur. Yes?
Well, when you, earlier in your progression of steps, you were talking about you were out seeking, or you were approached by companies that were interested in buying the technology, 3M now. Looking back on it, if you did the lack of funding to build a plan drive that particular strategy, or was it just the flow of events driving the strategy?
So the question is, was the strategy of hoping to get the technology acquired, was that driven by lack of resources, or was it driven by business concerns? And I would say both, but fundamentally it was a business decision. If you're a founder, then you don't want to be diluted. You don't want to raise $15, $18, $20 million, because that means that you start with two partners, you've got a 33.33% ownership in the company. If you raise enough money, that can get diluted to essentially zero. So what you want to do is leverage what you have in the best possible way. You want to raise as little money as you can and hand it off to somebody in the earliest stage that you possibly can. The real world has a different opinion about that, though. Most companies, it's a rare company that will take a flyer on technology like this and say, that's all right, we'll take it off your hands, we'll develop it, we'll build the factory, we'll figure it out. Most companies are very, very risk averse, and what they'll say it openly and with no shame. They'll say, tell you what, you build a factory, you prove to us not only that you've got a prototype that works and that you can pass testing and that you can make it in small quantities, prove to us that you can make it in large quantities and that you have sales channels and that people will buy it. Prove that to us and then we'll buy the technology. Well, fuck you. Right? If we do all that, then what possible motive would we have to sell it?
Well, I was
Risk capital.
yeah,
Risk
I
capital.
follow what you're and lived it, but I guess the point I was trying to figure out was the idea of building your product versus developing the technology, picking a product, building it, and saying, here it is in a smaller than $15 million plan. Was the inability to do that, or the lack of desire to do that, driven by, there's probably a minimum size plan you could build to do something like this? Yeah,
I think the question is, could we have built a smaller factory and thereby achieved some higher economic leverage? And the answer is no. As I say, the actual cost of the factory itself is under $5 million, which is staggeringly low for a product of this type. Our competitor, one of our nearest competitors, is a company called View, which was spun directly out of Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. They were created and funded in order to compete with us. I looked at that technology. Here's the irony. I looked at that technology. I talked with the inventor at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and I ran the economics, and I said, you're insane. It would cost $100 million to build this factory. There's no way. We're not doing it. We're going to invent our own technology, and we did. But what someone else did was spend that $100 million to build a factory, and they used the government's money to do it, which infuriates me to no end, because we were never offered the government's money. But the difference between a $5 million factory and a $100 million factory is colossal. And they have kind of the same problem that we do. It's not enough to build the factory. You then also have to operate the factory. You've got to pay the staff. You've got to pay the salespeople. You've got to buy the materials. So they're in for another $100 million. They're raising vast sums of money all the time. I mean, every couple of months, they're raising as much money as we've ever raised. So it looks like a lot of money only because we're so small. But if you look at the scale of what we're doing, the scale of what we're capable of turning out versus the nearest competitors, it's astonishingly capital efficient.
What's the revenue potential of a plant running 2 shifts?
The question is, what's the revenue potential of a plant running 2 shifts? I'm not up on the latest economic models. The last time I checked, it was on the order of $100 million a year.
That's a nice balance, don't you think?
Yeah. Right, and you know, that again, that makes it very attractive to angel investors. They want to make the world a better place. They like the product on its own merits. They want the product for their own house. If you also tell them, by the way, your very small investment here will return this very large investment in 4 years' time, again, that becomes a very easy sell. Yes, the question is, having seen the benefit of liquid crystal in our product, did we think to invest in the liquid crystal industry on the side? And the answer is no. Liquid crystal industry has been around for a long time. It's very well established. The margins are very, very thin. So it's not a great investment. It's not anymore. It's become a real commodity business. And the big European suppliers are being savagely competed against by scrappy Asian suppliers. And, you know, a company like Merck basically says, you're not buying liquid crystal from us, you're buying expertise from us. You know, you tell us what you need and we'll give you exactly that and nothing else, and it'll be perfect because we're German. No, I'm not making, that's really how they think of it. They take a great pride in what they do, but their costs are very, very high. And there are these Asian companies that will come along and say, you know what, Merck doesn't know any more than we do. Or if they do, you know, who cares? We'll give it to you for 1/10 the cost, and you can hire an engineer to figure out the difference. So no, liquid crystal is a lousy investment. And most of the companies that make liquid crystal are also making the materials for OLEDs. So they don't care which display technology wins out in the end. And this was really one of the problems that we had in doing the engineering, was driving the costs down. We're basically adapting video display technology for the building materials industry. The video display industry is not very cost sensitive. I mean, they think it's cost sensitive. They, oh my God, you know, we can't charge less than $100 for this TV set. You know, there's kind of a floor there. But you know, for that same square foot of liquid crystal with stuff wrapped around it, you know, where they're charging maybe $100 a square foot, we're charging 15, and that's to the end user, which means we have to source the materials for, you know, 1/4 of that. So the downward pressure that we had to exert on the suppliers was also very severe, and that didn't make them happy. Everybody wants to be involved in a cool new industry, but when they realized that their margins which are already thin, are going to be further compressed to get into this market. A, they don't like that, and B, they worry about it bleeding back into their video display business, that if they sell it this cheap to us, then are they going to have to sell it this cheap to everybody? So this kind of factors into the calculus for a lot of the suppliers. Whereas the Asians, you know, China gets a really bad rep. A lot of Americans will dismiss China as a country that's not innovative, that is a country full of kind of imitators and fast followers and things like that. And there's some truth to that. There is some truth to that. You know, you can work with a European supplier for years and never get really where you want to be. Whereas you can call up a Chinese supplier and you can say, listen, we need this material and we need it for this price. Can you do it? And usually, most of the time, 90% of the time, they'll say, well, let me call you back in a couple of days. And they call you back in a couple of days and they say, yep, can do. And Americans don't give the Chinese credit for this scrappy can-do attitude that they have. There's a billion Chinese with a scrappy can-do attitude. All too often we've lost that attitude here in the US. You know, we can do this, we will do this, we'll do it ourselves, we'll figure out a way. If these are the requirements, we'll find some way to do it. The Chinese are also very happy with very thin margins.
So we're running up on the time here, maybe one or two more questions.
Okay, yeah.
Well, this might even be a summary question. What's next? Are you going to work on some of the spin-off ideas? Is it time to just travel? What?
That's a question I've been asking myself. And the quick answer, honestly, you know, this I suppose some people look disappointed when I say this, but I was a professional writer, a full-time writer for 5 years, which is a dream job, but it's also a roller coaster. And then being an entrepreneur, you know, is a very, very tough battle. And I've put my family through an awful lot. And my kids are nearly grown now, and my wife is sick of all this stuff. So whatever happens next is going to be very sedate and it's going to have at least the illusion of security. Beyond that, I'm still filling in the details, but am I going to take any more wild ventures? No. In fact, you know, from almost the minute I was out the door at Ravenbrick, some of the investors that I know were saying, well, what do you got? What's your next big idea? And my answer is basically, fuck off.
All right, let's give Will a big round of applause.